Welcome to Crisis in Perception. Here, we dig into the systems that shape our world. Think of this as a compressed structural companion to our deep dive on evolution and the designer myth, using Richard Dawkins' Outgrowing God as our case study. And today, we're not just looking at the debate itself, but at the competing systems of explanation that are really driving the whole conversation.
All right, so let's jump right in with a puzzle that it's challenged thinkers for centuries. When you look around at the natural world, from the staggering complexity of a human eye to the intricate dance of an ecosystem, it just feels like it was made with a purpose. The whole thing looks designed. But how do we actually explain that?
Okay, take this classic example from the African savanna. You've got the cheetah, this absolute marvel of engineering, built for pure explosive speed. And then you have the gazelle, which is just as perfectly equipped for agility and a quick getaway. Each one seems perfectly crafted for its role. It's so easy, so natural to look at that and think, wow, somebody must have designed this. But is that really the only answer?
And that question, that right there, brings us to the very heart of what we're talking about today. We're not just looking at a single fact here. We are looking at a clash between two huge competing systems of explanation, each one trying to make sense of all this complexity we see.
So you see, this is way bigger than just, where did cheetahs come from? This is a much deeper conflict about the very logic of how anything complex comes to exist in the first place. It's all about the process. How do you get from simple to complex? And whichever path you go down, it pretty much reveals the entire framework you're using to make sense of the world. So to really get a grip on this, let's break down these two opposing ways of thinking. Dawkins labels them top-down and bottom-up. And that's a really useful way to see it.
Okay, so the top-down approach. It's super intuitive, right? It just makes sense to us. You see a complex thing like a watch, and you know there had to be a watchmaker. So a complex universe must need a universe maker. But the bottom-up view, that's a whole different story. It's totally counterintuitive. It asks us to picture complexity being built up gradually over these immense stretches of time, with no designer, no plan at all. Just simple rules repeated over and over again.
This top-down idea was perfectly summed up more than 200 years ago by the Reverend William Paley. His whole argument was, look, if you find a stone on the ground, you don't think much of it. But if you stumble upon a watch, with all its little gears and springs working together, you know instantly that it had to have a maker. And for him, the entire living world was just a much, much more complicated watch.
Okay, so here's the really crucial question. If the designer idea is so intuitive, and the other one is so, kind of weird, why doesn't everybody just believe in the designer? To figure that out, we have to stop looking at the arguments themselves and start looking at the incentives behind why we choose one explanation over another. So let's use a little metaphor here. Let's call it the marketplace of explanations. Now, in this marketplace, all these ideas are competing for our belief. But here's the thing, it's not exactly a level playing field. Imagine some vendors are not successful because their product is the best, but because they have these deep, you could call them identity contracts with their customers. Contracts built on tradition, community, and family. And this is where we can really see what those contracts look like. On one hand, you have the top-down or design system. What holds it together? Well, it's all about social and emotional incentives, community, identity, having a story that makes sense of everything. Then you have the bottom-up, scientific system. It runs on a totally different set of rules. The incentives there are all about evidence, about being able to prove something wrong. And it stays stable because it's constantly correcting itself based on what we can test. And when you grasp that these two systems are running on completely different incentives, you really start to understand why the old ideas are so persistent. It's the key to figuring out why that intuitive, top-down explanation is still so powerful, even today. Dawkins brings up a real interesting idea for why this happens. He calls it a byproduct theory. Basically, for a kid to survive, it's a huge advantage to just trust what your parents and elders tell you. Don't eat that berry. Don't go near that cliff. It's a survival shortcut. But that same useful trait, that same shortcut, means that other, less verifiable beliefs can get passed down just as easily. The wiring is the same. And this gets us to the core idea here, the crisis in perception. We see what looks like a debate about facts. Who's got the right information, who's smart and who's ignorant. But we're missing the real story. The real conflict is between these two systems that are stabilized by totally different incentives. It's not a fight about information, it's a fight about the very infrastructure of belief. All right, so for our last section, let's zoom out a bit and see how this all connects to the bigger picture. Because these ways of explaining the world, they don't just exist in a vacuum.
They're actually reinforced and passed on through huge societal structures. We're talking about our education systems, the narratives we see in the media, our family and cultural traditions, even our political institutions. All of these things help make one framework feel normal, and the other feel, well, not so normal.
So look, the point of all this isn't to pick a side or declare a winner. It's really about giving us the tools to see the structure behind the debate. Because once you can see the system and you understand the incentives, you're no longer just watching two people argue. You're seeing the architecture that's shaping the argument itself. And that's a whole different level of understanding.
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a longer audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description. If you enjoyed this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.